James 1 is James All About Business. Today I'm going to talk about more thoughts that I have on Chief of Staff roles. It's a fantastic role, but it's not necessarily a career. Stay tuned, I'll give you my thoughts and perspectives on this topic. When I was talking about this, there is a lot of topical matter. And in doing so, it's to think about this in terms of all the aspects of this role and to calibrate what it is, what it isn't, and the realities of this role. So I love word clouds. I think they're really important to distillate, to really get an idea of what this specific role is. And I think this is a nice way of honing in on features and perhaps aspects that you're thinking about in terms of the role that you're seeking, or perhaps the role you are in today. I received a lot of responses and a lot of comments and people emailing me, and I think it's really important to think about this in terms of calibration. So I also wanted to calibrate this because while it is a fantastic role to have, it's also one that has things to think about in terms of your future career. This role is another way of getting to another role you want to go to. On my previous video, I received a lot of questions and comments, a lot of emails, and a lot of reach outs. A lot of positive ones, I might add. Now, I also thought it's really important, bring out the realities of this role because I think a lot of people are excited about it. In the future, more COS roles will occur and not less. So half a generation from today, we're going to see many more distributed in many organizations and organizational types. So for-profit, non-profit, governmental, and so forth. The executive complexities of any executive team has created this role type. The details for this are the reason it exists. Details of everyday organizational life is really inherent in why this role exists. Internal expertise is needed, and it's not a series of just consulting engagements. The reason for being, Raison is really the force multiplier, actioning for an executive and leadership team, moving and unifying leadership for activation, decision management, and you as a chief of staff is taking the initiative to be a project manager to making sure that all the actions they need to have happen take place. It's not just a system or systems. It's not a singular methodology. It's many methodologies and systems. But you also need one methodology like team excellence to keep a team aligned. A connector to a larger community, frequently interfacing with individual contributors and also the organization's greater community of stakeholders. Now, the current state, as we see here, is that oftentimes, not always, that the chief of staff is really in the C-suite. And maybe they sit opposite and work with the EA, the executive assistant, for a leader in the leadership team. And this is what you're going to see most often in terms of most organizations and how they've configured this role. Future state of chief of staff roles in an organization. Now, this is a more complex organization, and this will make sense to you. That is, the C level is the C-suite. The E level is the executive vice president level, and the S level is senior VP level, and the V level, as you probably guessed, is a VP level. This is an example where I think more COS roles are going to help align and keep organizations moving forward. Now, I do think that many organizations just have a C level at this point, and many organizations that are super complex today, in fact, have this model, but they're very, very rare in terms of the number of complex organizations that use a chief of staff in this way. But this will be something you'll see much more in the future. Now, what I'm going to get at is, well, I think a lot of people think about that it's such a unique role, that it's really personality driven, but everything I do and everything I touch has to be process bound, process excellence, process optimization. So a chief of staff role is not exempt from that. Process, not personality. This is how you move an organization forward. So when you systematize an organization to have a process and you create the process, this is something that lives on beyond that specific person in that role, and they move on to another role. Or maybe they leave the organization. But whatever they leave behind, if they were a good chief of staff and the leadership was really committed to that role, you would see that a process has been developed over time. So when organizations start off, you have a brand new chief of staff. That person will be a pioneer. They're the first in that role. They're first in charge to really create the process optimization and to create this role so that other people can succeed in that role in the future. So praxis is important because it means practice. So in the praxis category is to move this role to something where it is a practice. It's something that is really initiated from one organization within a larger organization to move forward, to create prescriptions on how this organization can create solutions for the future. Now, onboarding. Now, if this is your first time in this role, you really want to think about this in terms of, looking at your job description, review, refine, and rewrite your job description. While you might have one that was given to you before you started, it probably is not what you're doing or will be doing, or at least most of it is something that you're going to be doing on your own and creating this role from scratch in many ways. Voice of business, voice of customer. Really knowing your customer internally as well as externally, but really this focus of this position is to be internally focused for those stakeholders. And yes, stakeholders could be customers or maybe service partners, but ultimately, let's look inward. That's what a chief of staff does. That's what I've done, and that's what I advocate for you in your chief of staff role, that you succeed in the future in doing that. Road mapping, making sure you're making strategic points to guide yourself in this role and making sure you're hitting those touch points, as well as your career horizon. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Process planning and execution. It's about process optimization, not personality. Again, I bring that home. This is an opportunity in this role to create process. Your executive leadership team will really require and depend on you to do that. In fact, they may depend on it, but not realize it or even vocalize it. But this is something you can do proactively to help meet that for future needs, as well as making sure you succeed in this role. Role scope is important. What do you do? What do you not do in this role? What are you asked to do? What are you expected to add to this role? So steer clear of chief of staff roles that advertise perhaps in a job description that it really has a significant admin focus. That is, they expect you to be an admin assistant. And in my view of this, you cannot be both. You cannot be an admin or executive assistant and a chief of staff. They're completely separate. While I've met executives who believe they're exactly the same, or that you can actually get a lower cost in terms of paying for one position versus two, you really can. Ultimately, and yes, the adage applies here, you get what you pay for. So you can take initiative on what you do via the insights you will gain in this role. That's very essential to do. Those that succeed really look at insights to guide them to create a solution, to guide them to be prescriptive in the organization. Understand the organization and current state. You may be the only person who is consciously doing this, thinking about the current and even future state of the organization. Sometimes organizations don't understand themselves in the way that perhaps people think they do, and it's up to you as a chief of staff to bring that, clarify that, distillate that, and really translate that to your executive team so they're aware of those currents, as well as bringing that out as opportunities and talking points and touch points. Internal consulting, analyze and diagnose conditions, states or problems, and being able to predict but to institute new states, new methods, and new processes and strategies. And lastly, what will be your prescriptive position to succeed in this role? And I use the word prescriptive quite a bit because I think that is really the end state, is to create solutions that are going to be something that lives on for a very long time. Now, time and role. This is getting back to the reality of this role. I do not believe this is a career, simply because in this role, it has, I would say, 4 years as the maximum per role. And I would say that if you do this role, you can actually do other roles in the future. If you're successful, you can move onward and actually probably have a greater opportunity to move forward and have a greater success in what you do, and perhaps even greater satisfaction. So you can see on the right side of this is implementing, optimizing, and declining returns. If this looks familiar, it's really about the economic model of diminishing returns. And I do believe that perhaps optimizing in this role for you in this position is perhaps the second or third year. If you keep doing this position, which you can do, and I really want people to think about this, while I'm not saying don't do this, or if your heart is set on being a chief of staff for a lifelong career, then you really should exercise what you want to do and what you feel most comfortable in doing. This timing role is important to look at. This is a model, say the economic model of diminishing returns, and I do apply that to a chief of staff role, and in particular from the viewpoint of a chief of staff, not necessarily the organization. Now, what I mean by this specifically is you implement, you're increasing the productivity, and there's something that's going to be gained from the organization as well as yourself. I do believe there's an optimizing period in, say, the second to third year in this role. There's a maximum yield you're going to get from this role. This role should rotate to other people in the organization. This is not a career. Don't stay in this role forever, in my opinion. I did not do that. And if I had an opportunity to go back, I may not do that because there's only so much I learned that I can do. There's only so much I can implement in an organization. And I think there's more rewarding possibilities after that fact because you are someone that you should be sought after because you have that experience. So you'll always have one central manager, perhaps your CEO, your EVP, or your SVP, or whatever title they may have. But you'll also have the leadership team as your manager. And what I mean by that specifically is that when you have calibration or talent reviews or whatever it might be, they're going to be like your manager. In fact, of having just one person reviewing you, they're all going to be reviewing you at some point. And some may have very specific comments. Perhaps some may be supporters, and perhaps some may not. This is a reality of this job. While this is a job that can demonstrate expansive capabilities, again, this is not a career. Why would you want to do this role as a career with the amount of time that it takes? This will mirror your executives. And in fact, while they say work-life balance, it may mean everyone else except the executive leadership team and including yourself as well. And your compensation will never mirror theirs as well. So I've seen compensation can be superbly low. So I've also talked about net promoters and detractors. They're your leadership team. You're going to have those that are going to completely support you and those that do not. And those that do not often have a very loud voice. And sometimes it depends on how influential they are to other leaders in terms of how during compensation or talent review or succession planning they are to your performance or things that may have happened in the past. And also it's not based on just what you do, but maybe a set of personalities that may be different than yours. And so therefore they may not always be supportive of you. You will work evenings and weekends. There's no doubt about it. Will you work every weekend and evening? Maybe, maybe not. But I do believe in my role, I've done that 7 days a week. I even worked on my vacation, which, again, this is about the realities. I want to be clear about that because I want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success. Some leaders are going to say their COS needs time away. Maybe they need to attend to their children's events or vacations or whatever it might be. Some will be really strong at that, but many will not be. And a reality to keep in mind is the executive succession as well as changes. So perhaps I've been in organizations where there's been a series of changes in an organization. In one organization, I succeeded 3 leaders, but the way each of those left were very amicable. They were going on to specific roles that elevated them to other roles in the future in other organizations, both internally and externally. So that was a very amicable change in that organization. So when you think about this slide, this is where declining returns comes in because you're not experiencing everything. So very few chief of staff roles are really going to be able to say focus in on organizational development only, or maybe financial planning, or perhaps strategic planning. So there's different ways of thinking about this role, and this is one of the limitations that I think is really essential to think about. If you've done this role and you're smart enough to do this role and do it successfully, you really want to reward yourself by doing those meaningful things in the future. And so therefore, you will need to succeed yourself in a different role at a different point in the future. I've enjoyed learning more about particular roles I've done after my chief of staff role. So if I did not succeed and go on to a different area, I would never have learned another functional area or operational feature of an organization. So for me, it was really worth that point. And in many ways, while I was very, very happy and very grateful to have my chief of staff role, so there's only so much I could do. But the jack of all trades and master of none is really a very important point to think about. And finally, a leadership team should recognize your value and graduate you to another role in the organization in the future so you can train a successor so that you can really experience something that's going to garner your career in the future for things that are really important for you to really think about, to execute to, and to really find satisfaction in your role. So if you can do this role successfully, you can do another role just as well. Plan your next role before you start your COS role. Have a plan, take action. Follow that roadmap, update it constantly. Look for opportunities to do on-the-job training. Engage your development plan, and keep moving forward. This is a fantastic way for you to elevate to your leadership team. Yes, there are risks sometimes to taking a new role, but sometimes those risks are really important for you to think about and to take action if you want to do that. If you feel comfortable in doing that, I think the purpose of this video is really to give much more that realistic viewpoint. So when I did my first topical matter on this subject, I felt like while I did explain a lot of the exciting things about it, I also wanted to calibrate that so that you're thinking about this role in a realistic manner. I hope this is helpful. Questions and comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video today. I do appreciate it. Stay tuned for more subject matters from me, James Melendez. James, all about business. Stay tuned.